It's spring, and I'm thinking of Dark Souls. Spring is a far cry away from my favorite season. Often I find it too hot, too covered in bugs. Where I live, it gets really humid and I run pretty hot. There are, of course, things to like about it. Easily a gorgeous season in theory, though where I live and work, it's too industrialized to see it. Spring mornings are brisk and cold and beautiful, though as the day drags on, I now have to drag my light jacket around with me, and knowing me, I'm liable to lose it. Spring has this classical identity to it too. I am, as part of a video game club hosted by my dear friend and Dark Souls rival Professor Bopper, playing The Legend of Zelda Oracle of Seasons right now, which dubs it a season of discovery. Vivaldi based his iconic Concerto No. 1 La Primavera on these accompanying sonnets, or maybe vice versa, where he describes the season idyllically. Sleeping shepherds, gentle breezes, birds singing for its return, all the kinds of things to prove that Italy in the 1700s was deeply unbothered. Probably. Spring is a complicated beast to tie to a game as faded out as Dark Souls. Where spring is verdant and beautiful in its imagery, the world of Lordran is decrepit, a decaying husk of itself. The residential districts filled with the undead or with poison and rot, the ruins of the past haunted and flooded, the Witch of Izalith's city engulfed in fire and chaos, her arts lost forever. Dark Souls' pinnacle, its most glorious vista, Anor Londo, is a facade, an illusion crafted by Gwendolyn, hidden in the depths of the darkened, empty city. Gwyn, the final boss of the game, is holding desperately on to an age in decline. I mean, hell, this game even released in September. And yet, spring is many things. Butterflies, for example, are themselves symbolic of spring, blossoming metamorphic growth, but also carry more foreboding ideas, harbingers of the soul, portents potentially of death or tragedy. For all their beauty, they are fragile, short-lived creatures. Other big signifiers of the season contribute more ambiguous messages. Yes, life is extant in art about spring, but not without a reckoning of what came before it. Petrichor, the pleasant, earthy smell that accompanies rain, only comes out after long, dry periods. Even many spring festivities and traditions carry a bittersweet element to them. Sankt Valpurgisnacht is a festival that seeks to ward off illness, infection, pain, and loss. Santa Semana is a religious festival in Spain that occurs in April, and it is a penitent one, people marching in processions barefoot, sometimes even in shackles. Even Vivaldi, for as sweeping and idyllic and beautiful as he makes each season sound, cannot help but allude to the roaring of thunderstorms amidst it all. In a frenzied obsession with this, I dove further. I needed to make sure that I could see the vision. I could see why I would even start down this path. Nanohana, a traditional Japanese spring dish, is characterized both by its beauty, the canola flower blooming, these vibrant yellow blossoms that sweep the countryside, and by its slightly bitter flavor profile. Allegedly. Apparently I live in the canola flower prohibition zone and cannot find any, so instead I simply have to pretend and admire the idea of it like a poser and a fake. So, instead, I went to a really nice sushi place in my area maybe and spent way too much money on trying some Madai sashimi. It's good. To see and appreciate the bounty and vibrancy of spring is to be aware of its ephemeral presence in our lives, to appreciate that the flowers in bloom will not last, and that is okay. It is a shame that Gwyn cannot seem to understand such things. But I'm getting ahead of myself. How could I not? These games have an effect on people, an almost instinctive urge, the deeper you crawl into them to try to endlessly make sense of what they've exactly done to you. It's done this to me. I consider it, look back on my stream of it, the footage I've been authorized to use courtesy of my dear friend and Dark Souls rival Professor Bopper, and find myself playing Dark Souls again, deliberately badly. I just want to see it. I literally spent way too much money to try a specific kind of wild sea bream, and also the Spanish mackerel, which was slightly better, because of Dark Souls. This is tax deductible. People try to talk about these games in many ways, but inevitably the conversation must pull down some familiar roads. After all, these games are infamous as the really inexplicably hard games for serious gamers. Look at how I die here. Look at how I got killed here, too. Wow, I got cursed here? Shameful stuff. For however much the game is an exploration of a world, a story with characters trying to do what you do and make sense of the world the heroes of old have left them, it is culturally trapped in a never-ending conversation about what it accomplishes purely as a system of mechanics. As much as I don't want to talk about the game, its difficulty, its level design, whether or not Joseph Anderson understands Dark Souls, there is no reality where a Dark Souls video doesn't talk about what is culturally understood to be Dark Souls. To be a Dark Souls game is to be in conversation with an entire era of modern game development.
Because the game of the decade is Dark Souls.
I don't know. I don't know what to make of it that hasn't already been made in that regard. The game seemingly can only be seen in the context of the world it inhabits, which is to say, our world. It's fitting, in a sense, because, well, Dark Souls is a game that is obsessive by nature. That's not to say that you couldn't theoretically have a completely casual relationship with the game, clear the content, see the story, reach the end, roll the credits, and move on, but that usually isn't the case, is it? And I think that if we can make sense of why this is, the answer has to actually travel through my metaphorical Blight Town, down into it, and back up again, only to find the Firekeeper dead. That probably makes sense. But I, of course, am talking about difficulty in video game. It is maybe the conversation about Dark Souls. It's too hard. It's for babies. You die unfairly. You feel like this game is bad, and I cannot, as a singular cat in singular space, singularly explain why people don't like these games, and why that dislike is an inherent flaw of the game and not an emergent part of the experience of committing to an artistic vision. But we can pick at some things. An example, YouTube media critic Joseph Anderson's pretty old videos on Dark Souls help to highlight this feature. Through the course of his videos, you can see him time and time again gesture at what he sees as the critical failings of the game. Here he fights the Bell Gargoyles, a fight wherein a boss arrives, and halfway through its health bar, a second one appears out of the blue to pincer you. He explains how tedious the fight is to engage with when you're a single person with a simple sword, trying to time attacks and dodges, only to then show in boring, tedious detail how effortless the fight is when you come in with magic. Anderson is here grappling with a particular kind of design decision-making that runs antithetical to what he believes to be good game design by some measure. The game is at its best in certain places where he is satisfied by the mechanics and falters over places where the game is unfair, and he can only point to mechanical elements of the game to try and explain what's happening. When talking about the story, Anderson says to skip it. There's nothing there. This, I think, has been disproved pretty soundly by now, and I understand that I've been picking on an ancient video of his, but it is a video that cannot seem to interpret the game, even on the level of it as a series of mechanics. Here's a fun one. The infamous Capra Demon. On screen now is me killing the Capra Demon in a single attempt. This is a bad boss fight according to this 9-year-old video because if it doesn't align with a specific way of playing the game, then it is unduly punishing. It is the thrust of Anderson's critique of this game, which takes the idea that he has ultimately made the correct choice by building one specific kind of character, and then gets upset at the idea that his choice has fights where things are harder than others. Instead of thinking about flexibility, exploration, instead of approaching this game as a collection of resources, he approaches it like it's Final Fantasy I, where the only choice you can feasibly make on how to develop your character happens early and is a long-term commitment. I went into this character hoping to use Priscilla's Scythe for art reasons, and here I am slapping on high poise armor and using this Black Knight's halberd I won to obliterate the Capra Demon easily. For those of you who are complaining that I am clearly more experienced with this game now than he was on his first playthrough 9 years ago, that's fair. Anyway, here's me soloing Ornstein and Smo in my first playthrough, using just the Great Sword. It took like 10 tries, but like I got there. Let me know if y'all would like a highlight reel of my Dark Souls streams at some point. Also, not to put too fine a point on it, but here's my footage playthrough where I died a Moonlight Butterfly because I don't have a ranged option. Tragic. Unfair. Bad fight. I need Twinkle Twinkle Little Star now, but also, here's me killing Moonlight Butterfly by summoning Beatrice. Is that unfair to do so? Well, Yes, because the Moonlight Butterfly is kind of beautiful and tragic, ephemeral moon creature operating not out of malice, evil, or personal motivation, but instinct. A sign of transfiguration, the corruption of soul magic as it morphs the body. Oh, also, yeah, sure, summoning is cheating or whatever. The thing the game lets you do and encourages you to do is bad in the spiritual sense. There's no penalty for doing this, outside of a general risk of invasion. There's maybe a small hit to how many souls you acquire from bosses, but beyond that, you only feel like this is bad because it feels like you have betrayed a constructed idea of this game. I would argue that these behaviors, restricting yourself in what resources you decide to use, denying yourself flexibility, community, these are mechanical limits placed upon yourself for external reasons. People don't go into this stubbornly playing a melee build throughout the game out of some need to hunt achievements or gain score points or unlock side quests, but because the game's mechanics are constantly imposing themselves on you. I'm going to very delicately put Final Fantasy XIV on blast here. Tragic, because I love this game, and there's a cottage industry built up to try to convince me that it's evil or something by now. But I will say that I miss the class variety in it. FF14 is in a situation now where beyond the basic functions of the 5 major playstyles, your choice in killing a boss with a katana, your fists, a spear, a scythe, 2 small swords, knives, is largely aesthetic. Yes, obviously high-level play demands nuances and particulars out of every playable endgame job, sure, but the game will not, nay, cannot, be built in a way where content will strictly punish your use of a particular job or strictly reward you for another. Outside of, like, warriors being able to skip one mechanic and sigmascape one savage if your gear was good enough, little niche mechanical boons that are otherwise able to be solved cleanly and consistently, the game is asking you to pick a job as a matter of preference more than anything. Dark Souls doesn't do that, and that's why we have something like one of Anderson's most hated bosses. Ceaseless Discharge is the elevation of this principle. Beyond looking at the game as a series of interlocking mechanics, the game is designed to honor its world and its story. The real trick these games play, from worlds as clearly defined and sensible as Dark Souls 1, Demon's Souls, Sekiro, even to the more abstract and bizarre like Dark Souls 2, is that the world feels adamantly real as a thing you are trying to contend with, rather than a thing designed to let you conquer it. Seath kills you. There's no two ways about it, and what Joseph Anderson sees as a deep betrayal of the game's logic demonstrates instead Seath's character, a thing that his video wouldn't be equipped to address, as he wrote off the story as weird and obscured, and not really holding anything within it.
It's an imaginative, grim setting that I enjoy, but have no illusions of there being any substance to it.
His video, as it exists, cannot factor in that Dark Souls is a story with characters and arcs and journeys, motivations. They just aren't beholden to you. This isn't the kind of game that will wait for you to be at the epicenter of all things, and that's ultimately what Anderson sought to do 9 years ago in his video. The video offers advice to improve the game, and all of that advice is framed nigh exclusively around focus on the game's relationship with the player as the only really important element to consider. You can't have jokes, cruelty, the kind of sensibilities that these games have if the only way to filter design choices is through making sure you're being the right kind of unfair to a player. You need to be able to be given the DLC. You need to be hurt in a way that feels like you've learned something. You can't be the victim of a prank if it's too embarrassing and silly. It is, honestly, a form of obsession masquerading under the guise of game design. Whatever perceived problems are there have clear solutions, but Anderson on some level needs to feel like he has had an authoritative experience with the game through the exclusion of its tools provided to help you play it. This is exemplified in his assessment of the characters in the world, which is to say, he doesn't. What care he gives to the characters is minimal, just large swaths of parts of the game left behind in favor of the player being instructed in how to have properly scaling boss encounters. And that's a shame, because the game has these things. Characters that can be summoned, can be talked to, bartered with, some that will do cruel things or descend to their lowest selves. Solaire will go mad, provided you don't find the means to save him. Siegmeyer will go mad if you follow his quest long enough, as does Rhea and Logan. Rhea, in fact, sits at a bizarre intersection of NPC motivations. She can be hunted down and killed. You can save her from her own companions in the Tomb of the Giants. The world is something you can uncover, you can piece together, but it is not here to be consumed by you. Your actions ripple out and change things. Ringing the 2 bells awakens the giants in Sen Fortress to open the gate and awakens Frampt in Firekeeper's Shrine. Those 2 actions push Siegmeyer to explore Sen's Fortress and begin the Crestfallen Warrior's descent into madness. The Crestfallen Warrior in particular is a deeply ironic hollowing, as he's the one who warned you about this process at the beginning of the game. Griggs and Laurentius can become hollowed, and taken individually, you can miss most of this. They're trying to evoke something in the player, and that ephemeral something can often be mistranslated as oppressive, senseless angst to drive home the vibe that you're in an evil place for hardcore gamers, and not that the world is alive with itself. That people are here for similar reasons you are, that they all struggle as you do with the burden of cursed undeath. Their journeys are reflective of what may be yours, what could be yours. To go hollow is to lose your connection to your humanity, your morals, your sense of yourself in context to the world around you. And that is a blurry, strange line to manage. Is Lautrec hollow? Like, no, he's not, right? I asked my friend and Dark Souls rival Professor Bopper's video game club chat and got pretty much what I expected from them, thanks gang, but if Lautrec isn't hollow, then he is just kind of like that. Killing the Firekeeper over a goddess that seems only marginally connected to Lordran in the first place feels evil, but he is working in line with his principles. To go hollow is to lose that part of yourself, to madness. Be it a loss of purpose, a fixation that compromises your spirit, people will drift into a despairing madness. It is a condition seemingly inherent to the bizarre composition of humans in this world, made of a dark soul and fire. For as much as the world seeks to replicate our own, recognizable people with recognizable environmental features, grass, flowers, a sky, the world is unbearably foreign the more you learn about it. How can you not go mad? How could anyone? Even you, the chosen undead, exist in nebulous gray space. You hollow, but you are still fully in control of yourself. But that full control is very generous. You can kill most every NPC in this game as you please. What you can't kill is either unkillable, like the Dragon of Ash Lake, or will flee from you like the undead merchant in the Aqueducts or Cath. Is this your mind hollowing, then? Turning your blade on the Crestfallen Warrior or Solaire? Is it just to kill Lautrec now, burdened with the knowledge of a future to come? Would such actions be recognized as prescient, or would people around you not worry that you are nothing more than another hollow? And yet, your purpose stands clear. When I was younger, I remember watching a friend of mine working through Darkroot Basin, off to kill the Hydra. They were playing with a full set of Havel's gear, Dragon's Tooth included, if I'm not mistaken. From my limited insight at the time, I figured the game was open-ended to a degree that finding a concrete sense of progression was going to be crushingly obtuse. How do you know where to go and what to do in a game that's as hands-off as this? Well, I was wrong, obviously. The game does direct you, of course. I just hadn't seen that part. But it feels expansive, open in a way that no other game in the series does. For as much as H-Bomb wanted to complain about the interconnectedness making the game weaker overall, even if I were to agree in some particular examples, it is a sacrifice of mechanical fluidity in service yet again to the game's fiction. Why does this game feel like this? Well, okay, in 2024, I played this game called Demon's Souls Remastered for the PlayStation 5. It's pretty good. I hear the original is better and that I'm a fake gamer for playing this version.
Oh, tell me all about it.
See, nearly every video that wants to approach these games will talk about Dark Souls like it spawned out of the blue, a bespoke treasure of a game, all while ignoring the much more obscure hipster title, Demon Souls. Wait, why is there a Game of the Year edition on the box art? Wait, take it down. Demon Souls is often eschewed for many reasons. I suspect maybe it's even as simple as it not having the SEO name for best results, sure, but also in cultural retrospect, the game's been redubbed to be kind of easy compared to later titles. But it's important to talk about Demon Souls because it is ultimately the key to understanding a lot of what is happening in Dark Souls. No, I'm not going to make some kind of lore video trying to explain why this game is secretly canon in the Dark Souls universe, but what I'm going to suggest is that almost every design choice made differently in Dark Souls is in response to a choice made in Demon Souls. There are some obvious mundane ones. Healing in Demon Souls never recharged upon death, but you could buy healing and stockpile it easy enough. Dark Souls, in contrast, made the Estus Flask. We all saw the H-Bomb video, please don't make me explain this further. Demon Souls has essentially a sampling menu of areas, Mega Man style, pick a zone, follow it to the end, fight a big scary boss, beat all bosses, win the game. In contrast, Dark Souls has made the world huge, sprawling, but tangible in a way that speaks to its intent. It wants you to feel like this is a world you've stepped into, and that comes at a strict narrative contrast, too. You arrive in Boletaria, in Demon Souls, get killed, get sent to the Nexus, where the Maiden in Black tasks you to help her in order to free your soul. Demon Souls cares a lot about souls, come to think of it. How strong a soul can get, what a soul can do, how it can be used. All of these things are interesting and consistent and clear enough because ultimately Demon Souls has a more traditional narrative. Allant has seized the power of the soul of an old god and is starting to break the world apart. You journey through the freshly corrupted world to either restore the soul or seize it for yourself, and what you learn about the world beyond that is interesting, but not as directly relevant as the goal clearly established through both the dialogue in the opening, as well as the structure of each level. The only way to progress is through each stage to each boss. That Dark Souls is like this isn't just a sheer random act of artistry and vision, but a clear response to what they had made before. Demon Souls proves that you can use a world to tell a story. Dark Souls iterates on that. The lore attachments on each piece of inventory aren't here to give FanWiki contributors homework, but instead are here to demonstrate a world that you are in the process of understanding. The characters are here to move, not the game's narrative along, but their own stories. Dark Souls has been made entirely to counteract the clear focus of Demon Souls, to make the world something forgotten. Let me indulge a little more. You don't fight anyone here at the peak of their strength. The game's opening crawl depicts these mythic figures, but in the interim centuries, the world has left them behind. The final boss in Demon Souls is Allant, a version of him at his most powerful, an illusion conjured to obliterate you. Here's footage of me blind killing him in a single attempt. Sorry, I'll stop bragging. In Dark Souls, Gwyn has splintered his soul and sat in a quiet, incendiary vigil over the flame for 1,000 years. Nito has been getting his strength siphoned away bit by bit over the years by Pinwheel. Oh, he's dead. All the great heroes are at a place where their vaunted, legendary position has been put in the past. Even someone as famed and powerful as Artorias is fought here, dominant arm hamstrung, consumed by the chaos, a violent, crazed beast of what he once was. These games are in kind of bizarre opposition to each other. Demon Souls is a game having an ongoing conversation about power and what people do to seek it, and what happens to the world as one does. Its most emotionally complex boss fight, Maiden Mistrea, can concede that she may have fair intentions, but is also just using ill-gotten corruptive power. By the time you get to the end choice, Demon Souls collapses into two positions with clear moral stakes, made even more clear because killing the Maiden in Black is emphasized with you digging your fat little cat paw into her head on your way to Power Town. But notably, Allant's final sentiment rings out.
You fool! Don't you understand? No one wishes to go on.
Which runs in counter to Gwyn's prevailing philosophy. Allant wants to believe that he is simply seeking power in a world that people have given up on. No one wants to go on, so he should take what is his. Gwyn knows that letting the flame die will bring about an age of dark, and with that age brings about the potential for the world he shaped and made to vanish. He cannot let go. He must go on instead. There's a debate to be had about the endings in Dark Souls, at least somewhat. The game puts a lot of weight to the Age of Fire. It is the age of certainty, an age in crumbling decline. There is no assurance that linking the flame will fix any wrongs. The world will never get better like this, but it will keep us going. The devil we know preserved. To link the flame is to keep spring in the air. This is probably good. It seems like the right call compared to the Age of Dark, a storyline that requires more work to hear any convincing arguments for. I reviewed the footage of the creature that sets you on your path.
Lord Gwyn resisted the course of nature by sacrificing himself to link the fire and commanding his children to shepherd the humans.
Kath points out that Gwyn resisted the course of nature, the very thing that he seeks to correct, making an argument not from power, not a temptation to turn you into a deity, some kind of sublime force, but to make the world take its natural course, to embrace that nothing will last forever. I remember reaching the end of the game the first time and just lighting the flame mindlessly. I was an idiot and touched the bonfire like it was any other. But there is an element to this game where moral choice feels weird and distant. Choices that were once so obvious and moral to me washing away. Sure, I didn't want to kill the crestfallen merchant for an Uchigatana, but Lautrec will kill the Firekeeper and I could get the Fap ring now, why not? The idea that the game would even care to ask me what I do. Even though our hero here is a silent, self-insert protagonist, there is no character here, nor is there a lot of interest in developing the chosen undead as some kind of profound moral actor, just as a vessel for your will. Whatever it is you decide to do, who you kill, what path to take, the game holds little in the way of judgment. It's how you can darken an Orlando, end the Spring Eternal, and to be scolded by the Firekeeper, and you, being a deeply emotional baby of a cat like me, feel basically nothing. It's how you can enter the painted world of Aramis and, well, Priscilla is kind of in a similar position as Maiden Estrella, in that she's a pretty sad, pretty girl that doesn't want to fight you, but you can just refuse to fight her. The game even tracks hitting her as an NPC hostility sin, which I don't care to meaningfully discuss, look it up. She is, however, a meaningful counterpart to Gwyn's philosophy. He launched a war against the dragons to start the Age of Fire and cannot let it go. Priscilla, outside of also being kind of ice-themed, is a hybrid of dragon and human. Her scythe and dagger have the life hunt ability, causing both the wielder and target to start to bleed. She is seen as the cessation of life, something that can end the lives of gods and must be obscured, hidden away. I actually don't know how to find her in the game's logic without looking it up. Hold on. Is it just the text info of the doll and the fact that you can interact with the painting? Ah, Jesus. The point is, though, that contrary to Gwyn, who not only has a big serpent who talks to you and chews on your rocks telling you about him and how to get to him, and will also just take you there to him if you say no, or if you fuck up or hate him, you can get a whole other serpent who will also just take you to Gwyn. Priscilla, instead, is pushed to the fringes, born with incredible terrifying power, but unable to be reckoned with while the world tries to continue to preserve itself. Does her life matter? Is her story worth the obfuscating veil drawn over it? For as much as Demon Souls can let you perform evil, it is pretty conscious of what that means. Doing the questline for Mephistopheles can only start to happen when you have pure black character tendency. Oh yeah, also, Demon Souls has literal black and white morality systems, plural. Oh yeah, also, her name is literally Mephistopheles. In Dark Souls, it feels almost perplexing to ascribe to it an idea that this is a world with a heavy emphasis on a moral evaluation. Yes, there is a sin system, but it's a matter of formality. Killing Lautrec is morally okay by this metric, but only after he killed the Firekeeper. You can prevent her death by killing him early, but that's a sin. Solaire will try and kill you, provided you don't open the shortcut, and Sigmar and Rhea and Kriggs and Logan and so on all will, but you have to wait for them to be hostile already before the book will dictate that not to be a sin. Killing Guinevere is a sin, but she's not even real. It is a morality system that's a matter of bookkeeping, not about what is actually just or moral, and that it is overseen by an NPC contributes to that feeling. There is no such system in Demon's Souls until the remake, where it is governed through prayer and reflection to a statue. This isn't a design flaw with either game. They're made intentionally to contrast each other. Christian God kind of exists in Demon's Souls. There's a clergy, divinity, miracles, a saint caring for the diseased and the wretched souls. All of this exists in this world because it is a world that's supposed to be understood. The aesthetic consistent and clear. Castles, prisons, mining tunnels, soldiers and workers, priests and smiths. But one that is getting consumed by the fog as the king's lust for power drives him mad and warps his body. Dark Souls has lost that divinity. There are gods here still. There is power that could be seen as divine, but it's faded and withered out into the recesses of the world. To ask for a moral evaluation of Dark Souls maybe feels so weird, because the world is past the point where any of the actors seem to hold much in the way of meaning. You're special. Your soul is trapped in the Nexus in Demon's Souls, but in Dark Souls, you're one of countless undead. What is death to you? What is the struggle that you're facing if it is not a test of your willpower, your conviction beyond your morals? Why are we supposed to care about Priscilla? This is the compelling energy in this game for me. Dark Souls is obsessive. It pulls you into its way of thinking because it can only process this world through that lens. You can only understand why you have to traverse Blighttown the way you do, why you have to deal with Seath kidnapping you, why there are no bonfires in New Londo, why Priscilla doesn't have to be fought but Sif does, is because the game resists compromising itself, which brings us, inevitably, to the end of our story. Not in the beautiful kiln of the first flame, not in the final room with Gwyn, not in the terrifying depths of Ulasil, but in one of the worst areas in the game, according to fans. Welcome to Lost Izalith. It sucks here, right? Let's shelf for now that I kind of like it. We don't have to talk about that. What I want to talk about instead is the assertion that it is unfinished, a perpetual smudge on this, one of the most important games in history. What do we make of this world, knowing that it wasn't the intent of the author, that they weren't able to finish it? We do know that it's unfinished, right? Like, oh, okay, yes, you're telling me right now that obviously it is. I can hear you typing, but like, are you sure? Because I looked it up, and I could see that the Bed of Chaos wasn't fully finished. Yes, don't get me wrong, I'm not denying that the boss fight in Lost Izalith, Bed of Chaos, isn't finished. That's at least something to corroborate. What I'm saying is that it doesn't strictly say, in this interview, that Lost Izalith is unfinished. It's perhaps sloppy. It perhaps feels unfinished. You can make a convincing argument that it could be, but as a strict matter of primary evidence, it doesn't seem like there's anything that explicitly says so. Why does that matter? Well, because now it's intentional art. I mean, it always was, but now you can't complain that I'm reading too much into an unfinished part of the game, and that was meaningful to me, maybe in the same way that it's meaningful for you that people don't summon for fights. Here's me summoning for the Firekeeper Sage. So the area is very open, and it doesn't have a lot of highlight features. A massive sea of lava, a bunch of rotting dragon legs, bizarre horrors, a really annoying pyromancer to fight, allegedly. There's a lot here that initially reads as slapdash, and that's fine. You're allowed to think this. I just can't help but keep thinking about it. What the actual thing is that we've been given, because it's interesting to me. One of the big fights in the introduction, Gwyn, Seath, Nito, what's-his-face, the Witch of Izalith is name-dropped, but her efforts have fully consumed her. She wanted even more than Gwyn. Gwyn has this meager spring, his life-bearing world that he cannot let go of, but the witch wanted to make more, to create another first flame, to have spring again in this metaphor, and the result obliterated her, her body, her family, her city. Lost Izalith is named as such because rather than a ruin that had to be contained, New Londo flooded, the Duke's archives sealed off. Izalith was conquered, her new form spawning demons that were beaten back and contained within the bounds of her secret city. There is no Izalith anymore. What it once was lost. Her name faded into a piece of history, kept alive only by Quelana, who lives in Blighttown, and the husk of the city itself. I think there's something profound here. The game has many ruined husks of places. Every place is a shadow of itself. The undead burg is barely functional, rotting structures, most of the population mad and violent. Darkroot Forest was once a city perched precariously atop the abyss, which inevitably collapsed, only to be grown over with bizarre, twisted forms of life. Is it not fair, or interesting, or compelling, then, to see Izalith have this kind of destruction to it? For the character that tried to recreate the original thing that brought about an entire age, that constructed and organized the world in such a totalizing way that her legacy would be obliterated. Isn't this Dark Souls? The kind of care and love put into a world as broken apart as it speaks to me. This game is in spring in my heart. A broken, ominous, foreboding spring, just like mine is in the real world. I live in an area that's not very wealthy relative to our neighboring cities. Faded industry has rendered this world almost incomprehensible as something in relation to the seasons. I spoke with a coworker that in working on this project, I've been investing more in eating seasonal produce. I want to return to this idea that the world ebbs and flows, and I with it. I want to feel connected once more to other people, to the parts of the world that still exist, to be closer to my friends, to become the Dark Lord and recognize the necessity of joy's passing, of its inevitable return. My coworker told me that these days apples are freshly picked year-round. And yet, when it rains, I can look out my window and see the unassuming street filled with houses, with people I don't know. I can open my window and smell petrichor in the air, and through the metal bars of my fire escape, I can think that there's grass and trees, that I can go and walk to the store, say hi to the people who still work there. Whatever fantastical idea I've had of the world I'm missing, some long-forgotten memory from my youth, visions of walks through fields of flowers or visits to my grandmother's rich friend and her impressive garden. Maybe even just remembering my grandmother's old rhododendron plant, remembering how it would never bloom when I visited, because it was a spring plant, and I only saw her over the summer. I want the world to be meaningful. And there is something compelling in Dark Souls' ability to do that with its own. Something rotten, violent, hostile, frustrating, but lived in, cared about. No one really talks about any area in this game as filled with monsters or infected with evil. There's very little language about the world being bad, just filled with violent residents. A small, subtle language trick that implies that Lordran, instead of a world of evil, is a world that has slid into its condition over time. The assailants of Lower Undead Burg live in little houses, and yes, try to kill you, but it's seen as rowdy by the text of the people that live in this world. There is a small, meticulous care here that threatens to consume, that made me reassess and go out and try to love a season that is my second least favorite. This is the beauty of Dark Souls, a game that invites obsession, a certain kind of madness. It's spring, and I'm still thinking about Dark Souls. Special thanks to Alexi Angelica, Athena Stripes, Bees Louise, Blair Renix, Blueberries in My Coffee, Colleen T, Evan Kearns, Foxy Hex, Gail Simmons, Grizz, Lewis Wells, Low Res, Maria Aladren, Michael McNay, Mocha Lappin, Narai the Redmarked, Noun Verbally, Philip Pryor, Professor Bopper, Rob Leon, St. Rawberry, Trade Good, TV's Ross, Valerian Wraithwall, and Zetetic. Thank you all so much.